Afternoon all. I'm with my good friend Paul Georgiou here today. Hi Paul.
Hi Trev.
I thought we'd go over the Sicilian defence, an overview video. I did once in the past do a 10-minute overview. I thought maybe we can do a little bit a more interesting dual commentary version of that, maybe a bit longer, trying to at least look at the main named variations of the Sicilian defence. So after E4, the Sicilian defence remains very popular today, doesn't it, Paul?
Well, I mean, I think at high levels it's the most popular response to E4. Certainly if black is playing for a win. C5 and E5 are the two most common moves, and C5 is more dynamic, more challenging, more unbalancing.
In fact, Gelfand used it to qualify, didn't he? To play Anand, he used the Sicilian with great success.
I mean, virtually all the top grandmasters used the Sicilian in the past. Certainly in recent years. It's the main way to challenge one E4 and play for a win with black.
So with this move, there's a control of that D4 square, and often, I've talked about in my videos, that black often is using a dark square strategy. Trying to, maybe sometimes fianchetto the bishop to put more pressure on D4, but D4 is like a central focus.
Well, if white plays D4, then a centre pawn will be swapped for a wing pawn, which I think as Larson said, it's a kind of, I can't remember the exact quote, but white's making a kind of gambit. But
D4 is not usually played immediately. So
no, but when it is played,
yes,
after knight F3, then white is giving up certain things in return for other things, and we have an immediate imbalance in the game, which leads to exciting clashes.
Okay, I think we should try and use as a framework, just to cover the main name variations. There's this wiki article, so we'll try and talk about the main variations mentioned here. So basically, the open Sicilian is knight F3. That remains, as one of the strongest second moves to the Sicilian, most popular, knight F3, which basically directly supports the idea of D4 to be able to recapture with this knight. So knight F3.
The interesting thing about knight F3 is it's, and certainly knight 3 and D4, is it's very popular at the highest levels and at lower levels. But round about 2000 rating level or 2000, people tend to avoid it and play C3 or other lines.
C3 is very popular
because there's so much to learn in the open Sicilian that they offer they go for a pragmatic approach and play a line where they don't have to be prepared for the dragon, the Najdorf, and all the other possible lines, and there are many of them. So at high levels, knight F3 is not so popular, but at the very high levels, at professional levels, it comes back in again as the number one move, the most direct challenge to black's structure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the most popular reply for black is usually D6 as an example of the open Sicilian. Is that right? D6, and that sort of contests another dark square, the E5 square, as well as maybe, if black ever wants to play knight F6 in peace without E5, I think that's quite useful, isn't it, to put a break on E5 from white.
Of course, black can play to knight F6 if he wants. I don't know if we can look at that later. That's the Nimzovich Sicilian, which is not supposed to be very good. Also,
knight C6 is an invitation for a Scheveningen, but it can run into bishop B5s. So knight C6 is another viable alternative. Of course, E6.
E6 and G6 is another move.
Yeah.
Hyper accelerated, I think it's called. And A6 is the O'Kelly variation.
A6. So there are a lot of options here. But let's pursue D6 for a moment, the open Sicilian. So D6, and now white goes on with this trade of the centre pawn for the flank pawn. So most often black will play C takes D4. I don't think there's...
Well, you can play knight F6 first.
That's a little trick, isn't it? Now D takes C5.
And you can take on E4.
And this is a known line.
Yes, and this is thought to be fine for black. So white normally just plays knight C3, and we transpose.
Okay, so that's very interesting actually, is that this seemingly casual knight F6 is possible, and if white tried to be quite violent with E5, that might backfire.
I'll just take that.
Yeah, and then there's trouble for white. Okay, so that's a bit of a move trick, but usually we have C takes D4, knight takes D4, and now black usually attacks that E4 pawn straight away. Now if black doesn't then you see, I think usually the idea is to force the c pawn to be blocked, otherwise there might be a dreaded Maroc c bind. So knight f6 does have the advantage of prompting knight c3, blocking in that c pawn.
Yeah, if black plays 4a6, for example, then c4 is a good move.
Yeah. Then say knight f6, we've got that Maroc c
And
bind.
knight c3, yes.
Yeah, and that's quite difficult because usually black's liberating breaks are either d5 or b5. And c4 sort of targets both, really, doesn't it? That move c4, so that's quite an important move to try and prevent. So knight f6, you know, I think that's the most mainline path for that reason. So now white usually plays knight c3, and now we have some alternatives. But the most popular, I think, popularised by Kasparov, I think, or Fischer, you know, Najdorf a6.
Well, the Najdorf is, I think, what's described as the Cadillac of Sicilians by Nigel Davis, I believe.
The what Sicilians?
Cadillac of Sicilians.
The Cadillac, all right. Because I think if e6, it might run into bishop b5, so it doesn't rule out bishop b5, which might be useful.
Is this called the Vichelin's variation? I could be making that up, but...
I used to play e6 rather casually, thinking, well, I can play a6 later as a plan. But yeah, then I discovered, well, actually bishop b5 might be useful for white.
Isn't e6 the Scheveningen?
Scheveningen, yeah. But you can sort of still transpose into a Scheveningen if you don't play, if you can play e6 later. But you have got e5 as another possibility, of course. So let's follow. So a6 is Najdorf. So Miguel Najdorf, he was on the road for Fischer, wasn't he? He's one of the people Fischer beat towards the 1972 match. So he gave his name to this variation, Najdorf.
Yeah, he claimed he was going to be world champion, but alas, that was not true.
And this is currently black's most popular system, isn't it? To the Sicilian defence, according to Wiki, anyway.
Well, it has been for many years.
Yeah, but is it necessarily to prepare e5? It's usually, I suppose, for e5, not for e6. So e5 is more aggressive in some respects, but it does weaken d5 a little bit more than e6.
Well, actually, what a6 actually is actually a high-class waiting move. First, it cuts out any bishop or knight landing on b5, and black's actually waiting to see what white does with his next move before he decides whether to play e6, e5, or g6.
Yes. So to discourage, for example, the English attack, maybe e5 is better, because otherwise white will get this kind of Dragon Yugoslav structure. You know.
Well, I mean, this is fine. I mean, for example, if white now plays a4, for example, in this position, here, then black can play g6. And he reaches a dragon variation where the Yugoslav attack is
ruled out.
Ruled out
because you wouldn't want to weaken your queen side. So that that is a high class waiting move, a6.
And if white plays the Fischer move, bishop c4, then black is advised to close down the diagonal with e6.
This has lost a bit of popularity, hasn't it, since the 70s? Maybe this Fischer-Sozin variation.
Yes, I think the problem is often this bishop on c4 gets swapped off.
I think currently, according to Wiki, the most popular weapon is now 6 bishop e3 instead of 6. So 6 bishop e3, which is the English attack, popularised by English grandmasters Murray Chandler, John Nunn, and Nigel Short in the 1980s.
Yes, the thing about bishop c4 is if that bishop gets swapped off,
yes,
and white doesn't get an attack going fairly quickly, he may well end up worse.
And usually, if black creates this pawn, puts pawn on e6, later a plan is to try and get a knight to c4. That's often a plan or something. What's the most effective plan?
I think black often plays a knight to c5 and removes the bishop.
Oh, I see. Yes,
on
after b5.
b3.
So knight d7 to c5 if the bishop's on b3.
Yes, I mean, but I think this line is still thought of as being quite dangerous, but it's quite aggressive.
So bishop e3. Okay, then there's so that's after 5a6.
Of course, there's other moves. Bishop g5 is another move in this position.
Bishop g5.
Yes. And black responds with e6. and white tends to play f4 here.
Right. Okay, before we go into that a bit more, let's just quickly look at the other variations. Instead of the Najdorf with a6, so we'll go to a6. C takes, knight takes. So this high class way to move a6. But there's also other fifth move alternatives. The dragon variation with g6, 5g6. So aiming to fianchetto this bishop and inviting that dangerous setup sometimes with f3. Actually, I'm not sure. Maybe f3 needs to be played here with bishop e3 because of that knight g4 sometimes. After g6. Bishop e3 is possible actually. I think bishop g2. Bishop g7 rather. f3 now.
And this is the Yugoslav attack, which is something you really should know if you're going to play it for either side.
Yeah. This variation, according to Wiki, is extremely sharp play, ferociously complicated. White's main alternative to the Yugoslav attack is bishop e2, the classical variation. So if we go back, we can still play bishop e2, that's classical approach. White doesn't want to commit necessarily to castling queenside.
Much more solid.
Or f4 is the Leavenfish attack. 6 f4. Okay.
Once quite fashionable, but not played so much these days, I think.
Okay, so as well as a6, g6, there's also knight c6. After knight c3, knight c6 here is the classical variation. So it's classically bringing out another knight. And now, White's most common reply to this is bishop g5, the Richter-Rosa attack.
Which is another very sharp line.
So that's Kurt Richter's invention, threatening immediately to double Black's pawns, of course.
Well, it's debatable if that's a threat or not.
Another popular variation is bishop c4. Okay, that usually plays e6 to limit the scope of that bishop on c4. Okay, and we could have the Fischer-Sozin attack if White castles kingside, I think, or queen e2 castling queenside is a Veromirovic attack. Okay, so there's another one, the Scheveningen variation. If we go back to move 5, instead of a6 here, e6 is the Scheveningen variation. And I just thought I was just transposing into it, playing a6 first, but e6 immediately is definitely, according to Wiki, Scheveningen variation territory. So Black is content with that small centre, and you have to be, you can pounce sometimes in the centre with either d5 or e5 later.
And Black doesn't necessarily play a6 here at all. Though obviously transpositions are possible.
And a very popular move here is different to what we've seen immediately, g4, because that weakness of the last move was kind of that bishop is blocked in, so g4 is actually technically possible.
Is this Kerr's attack?
Yeah, Kerr's attack after Paul Kers, who I think he was quite a very strong player, challenger for the World Championship many times.
Strong player from the 30s to the 70s.
So g4, he introduced this in 1943. White intends to drive away the Black Knight with g5. If Black prevents it with h6, White has gained kingside space and may let it play bishop g2. That will control some of the weak and light squares. Bishop g2. Okay, theory indicates apparently Black can hold the balance. Okay. Alright, now let's go on to other stuff here. 2 knight c6. Let's go back. Actually, just rewind backwards here to 2 knight c6 instead of d6. So this invites after d4. Let's go with d4. Here we've talked about this. We briefly mentioned Sveshnikov variation. So that's knight f6 immediately, trying to force that knight c3. And I used to play this a lot. I used to love this line, e5. Lots of theory.
It's a very complicated line.
I thought it sounded really cool. So it can go like this: knight db5 d6.
And now here, bishop g5 is the main line, but knight d5 is also a perfectly good move.
Right. Let's go with bishop g5 as the most popular. Then a6, and then the knight stumble, it seems. Now here there's two main moves, bishop f6 or knight d5, I believe, in this Sveshnikov line. So that was very popular in master level, that has been very popular in master level chess according to Wiki, and top players like Kramnik, Topolov, Vajbov, Gelfand, Adams, Kalifman, they've all played it.
Gavriel?
Yeah. So accelerated dragon is with 4 g6. So if we go back to move 4, after knight f3, d6,
d4,
c takes, knight takes. We've also got the accelerated dragon. So 4 g6.
This, of course, allows the Maroczy bind.
Yes, with c4, because there was no prompting for that knight c3. Okay. That's the critical test, actually, according to Wiki. White hopes to cramp black's position, cramping d5 and the b5s later. It's less tactical than many other Sicilians. Okay. Alright, there's the Kalashnikov variation for e5. So here, just e5, but this looks as though Kalashnikov suffers from the d5 hole, perhaps more than the others. But let's have a quick look. Knight b5. Sorry, no, I think I've got this wrong. Sorry.
It's with knight c6, isn't it?
Knight c6, d4, c takes, and then e5 here. Pardon me. No knight f6, but e5. And I used to play this thinking I was transposing often to Sveshnikov, but Sveshnikov actually is knight f6, technically not e5, not trying to transpose. So it can be completely different here. After knight b5, say d6, white has many choices. White doesn't have to play knight c3 again. There's a free hand to play other moves like bishop c4. This Kalashnikov variation is a close relative, though, to Sveshnikov Sicilian, sometimes known apparently as the Neo-Sveshnikov. So it's a long history back to Louis Charles Mal Le Bourdonnais, using against MacDonald in 1834.
But it's not as popular as Sveshnikov and possibly not as good.
The earlier games focused on a6, not playing e6 here. After knight b6, they focused on a6. It sort of cheekily prompts, doesn't it, knight d6 check, which looks quite dangerous, giving up, dark square control.
And black plays queen e7.
Well, I think queen f6 actually,
queen f6.
because this queen can pivot here and put pressure on these two pawns. Queen f6. Black gives up the two bishops to achieve a lead in development. However, the move fell out of use once it was determined white kept the advantage in these lines. The Lowenthal variation is similar to Kalashnikov, but the reply knight b5 to knight 5 knight b5 is a6. So if we go back there, a6. Oh, sorry, we've just looked at a6. Pardon me.
Black can also play knight f6 as well.
Knight f6. All right.
And now the e-pawn has to be defended.
Right, so that can transpose into a Sveshnikov, of course, like that. We've got Sveshnikov. Okay, the Taimanov variation for knight c6. So if we go back, okay, so Taimanov for knight c6. After d4, sorry, d6, d4 takes, just immediately for knight c6. Do you recognise that as a Taimanov, Paul? Do you know?
Not especially, no. I'm not familiar with the Taimanov.
Knight takes knight c6, so it's immediately challenging that knight with the queen's knight. Black develops the knight to a natural square and keeps the options open regarding the placement of the other pieces.
I imagine this could transfer into a different variation fairly quickly.
Yeah, like Maroczy binds here, Maroczy bind if c4 is played. The Kasparov game at 8d5 occurred in World Championship game 1985, one of my favourite games, the Octopus Knight game. Okay, so after this, Okay, the can, or also called the Paulsen variation for a6, even more flexible, not even committing a piece. So if we go back, so we haven't a6.
But that's isn't that with e6 and a6, not d6 and a6?
Can get very confusing. Sorry. So you're saying here?
No, the pawn's not on d6. The pawn's on d7 in the can.
Ah.
So 2e6.
All right. Yes. Yes. Good point. With the pawn on e6, c takes, and now you just move another pawn. So it's quite provocative. You just move pawns, haven't developed any pieces. So we've got a can, the Paulsen variation. This has provided some fascination to me, what distinct advantages it offers.
Well, the main one is that black can actually play out his king's bishop to c5 or b4, or even occasionally d6.
Yes.
And also he can play d5 in one move.
That's a good point, yeah, that could be very useful.
Those are the two main ideas.
White's most popular reply is knight c3. We might get this pin variation as well, this might call pin variation. It can be quite annoying.
I think queen c7 is normal here.
Queen c7, because that knight b5 is ruled out, and
just take it.
Yeah. So queen c7, yes. So that can Paulsen variation, quite fascinating.
It looks slightly alarming, putting all the pawns on light squares and developing the queen first.
Yes. Four knights variation is with e6 and then just developing the knights. So let's go back, e4. So knight, let's put knight f6. Was it knight c6 first?
Knight f6 first, I would think.
Right, so e5 is not so painful here. There's a check anyway. Winning.
Loses a pawn.
Yep. So now four knights here. So it's just e6, which is the only pawn move from black. So this is mainly used as a way of getting into the mainline Scheveningen, because after knight db5 d6 you can invite Scheveningen. But I wonder why that's used actually as a way of getting Scheveningen. I didn't usually employ that method, funny enough. I wonder what advantage you'd get from using this approach.
Well, the advantage is you cut out certain lines for white. For example, bishop b5 check lines. If you play d6 on move 2, then bishop b5 check is a move. If the pawn's on e6, bishop b5 is nonsense.
Oh yes, the bishop, or the bishop b5, the anti-Scheveningen. If you played it immediately,
if black plays d6,
if black plays knight c6 immediately, he's revealed his hand, hasn't he?
Or so knight c6 if you play the Rossolimo variation.
As bishop b5, sort of anti-Scheveningen. So this way of playing it, so you're playing cheekily e6 first. So you want to get a Scheveningen.
Yeah. I mean, 2e6 cuts out bishop b5 lines.
Yes.
Against d6 or knight c6, bishop b5 comes in. Against e6, it's a waste of time.
This is all tricky about move orders, a lot of this, isn't it, really? So here...
Of course, I think white can take on c6 and play e5.
Yes, this is quite theoretical, I think. Knight d5, knight e4. I think this is a lot of theory. This is something else, which... The four knights move order, white acquires the earlier option, according to Wiki of this.
I think that this was the line where Mike Adams famously lost to Richard Tozer in the Lloyds Bank Masters.
Yes, I remember that. I saw that on the demo board. Yes, I keep torturing his brother about his Philip about Richard Tozer's success in that, because that was spectacular at the time. So yeah, this variation is quite venomous, really.
But of course, those squares d6, c5 are pretty weak.
Yeah. Okay, but there's a lot of stuff like f5 that's possible.
Certainly is.
It's interesting. So let's go on to 2 knight f3 without d4. So after c5 we got knight f3.
There's still some other lines we haven't looked at.
Okay. Let's just check. I think we've covered some of the main topical name variations.
Well, the O'Kelly, for example, with 2a6.
All right. So a6 here, yes.
Yes, and white can play d4, but the one of the points is that black takes, white takes, knight f6, knight c3, e5, and knight b5 is not possible. So black can go into a Sveshnikov type structure, and white's actually been tricked.
Oh, without the knight b5. So if the knight goes there,
well, black can play bishop b4.
All right, that's quite nasty.
With potential d5 coming.
Yes, that's very, very nasty. Accelerated d5, useful pin. So that a6 is quite tricky. So what would you play then?
So white can play either c4 or go into a c3 Sicilian, arguing that a6 is not so useful.
Right, right.
Also, another knight I haven't mentioned is the hyper-accelerated dragon, which is 2g6.
Hyper-accelerated. Yes, immediately going for that fianchetto. Now, isn't this almost suffering a tactical risk in this line?
It's interesting. And now knight f6, e5. You play knight c6, and the queen is wandering around the board.
Yes. So say it goes, I don't know, here.
Well, knight d5.
Right. I think I seem to remember this. I think queen e4 might be a reasonable move.
Knight b6.
Right, so it's sort of got elements of an Alekhine defence almost, with the queen being encouraged.
And d5 is going to come fairly soon. That should be fine.
Yeah, it looks a bit like Alekhine defence improvement almost. So that hyper accelerated dragon, wow, g6 on the second move. So,
and also, I've mentioned the Nimzovich Sicilian as well.
Of course.
To knight f6, which isn't supposed to be very good.
So, say e5, you get a sort of Alekhine defence strategy again. Say d4.
Well, no, but I think white can actually play knight c3. I think that's quite effective. No, e5, knight d5, knight c3.
Right. Inviting double pawns.
Yes. And the thing is, black can end up with a backward d pawn. So if you play d5, we just take it.
Right, and not even mind the exchange of queens, or?
I mean, the bishop can go to c4 and.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Well, I know it's horrible, but bishop f4 and castles
bishop
quickly.
A lot of pressure. Yeah.
It's not as bad as all that, but it's not highly regarded.
Yeah.
Also, we missed out some lines in the Najdorf. Missed out bishop e2. Should have mentioned.
Let's go into that again. So the Najdorf, most popular.
Bishop e2 is another very common.
So it counter-enters with classical, can't it?
Popularised very much by Karpov in the 1970s, who won a lot of games with it.
Right.
But not so fashionable these days. White generally plays it more aggressively.
Yeah.
But it was very popular at one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we should mention the Pologayevsky briefly. It was bishop g5 instead, bishop e2.
Oh yes, the laboratory of I had a book about his. He did research continuing into this.
This is after e6, f4. Black plays the astonishing-looking b5.
Yes, it's very, very provocative. There was tons of analysis I remember looking at.
And really, this is not advisable unless you really know what you're doing. White can play e5.
Yes.
And black takes, and queen c7.
Yes.
And there are all sorts of sacrifices on b5 and...
Yeah. Kasparov beat him, though. He must have prepared a line against him to get an advantage in his pet line, Polgayevsky.
But it wasn't actually this line, though.
No, oh.
I think that's the game you're thinking of.
Oh.
But really, this is very, very dodgy. I don't think it's ever actually been refuted, though it's come pretty close. But I think technically this is still alive, though it's not played so much these days. You really have to know it. And if white doesn't go into it, then you've wasted a lot of time of preparation. And similarly, there's the poisoned pawn.
Oh yes, I was just thinking
which is in the same line.
So yes, I lost horribly recently in this very quickly.
F4, Queen B6.
Yeah, it's very daring to try and win that B2 pawn. Fischer lost, didn't he, in the 1972 match in this?
He lost against Spassky.
Yeah, was there a knight B3 game?
Well, knight B3 is more solid, but Queen D2 is the poison pawn, and now you take it. And Rook B1 and Knight B3 is also playable, I believe.
Right.
And from here on, Well, I think White plays f5 here, but it's pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah, Yifan Hu won in the Gibraltar with this very sharp game against Shirov, I think, Poison Pawn.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I think you could be right.
Yes, that's a recent game in this. So yeah, the Sicilian is really taking some key wins, even like this year, to help people win tournaments.
I mean, it's remained and probably will remain, Black's #1 choice if he's playing for a win at higher levels.
Mm.
I mean, it's just more aggressive than the Caro-Kann or the French, and better than the Alekhine or the Perk.
Yeah.
Of course, E5 is more solid if you're happy with the draw.
Mm. Shall we have a look at Knight F3 without D4 for a bit? Then we might go back into some other lines. So say D6, but without D4.
Yep.
So we've got
Here,
Bishop B5 check.
Bishop B5 is
Moscow variation.
Moscow variation.
Or the Kanal-Sokolsky attack. Grandmasters apparently they choose this variation when they want to avoid Fury, like it was played by Kasparov. Oh, when he played Against the World, and I was involved in that game, Kasparov Against the World, and it was a very interesting game actually. Very dynamic positions, but Bishop B5 was used. Yeah, that was quite annoying.
And Bishop D7 is the most common move here, but Black can interpose with a knight on either of the two available squares, if he so wishes. And after Bishop D7, White generally goes for a Roxy bind.
So takes usually, and doesn't mind because he's got rid of his bad bishop. So we've got the Roxy bind without the problem sort of piece of the bishop on the same.
And of course,
colour.
this is actually a gambit. Black can actually play Queen G4 here, winning a pawn, but it's not recommended.
No, there's a lot of initiative, isn't it?
D4.
D4, not
D4,
not,
yeah. And I'll take the white pieces. Thank you very much.
Also, I think commonly a lot of amateur players don't play this D4. They play Bishop C4.
Yeah.
I think been asked on YouTube.
Yeah. But still, Bishop B5, Knight D7 is also a move. And this gives White an important option. White can actually play D4 and recapture with the Queen.
With the Queen, yes, there's a lot of central pressure in this, isn't there?
And generally, White would give up the two bishops here.
Yes, I think Kasparov lost to Ivanchuk in this, didn't he? Or no, I think that was with Knight C6. But Ivanchuk, I remember one classic game, he gave up both bishops. I think
it was in this night. He gave up two bishops for the knights.
Yes, and somehow
with a Roxy bind.
Yes, and the bishops Kasparov's bishops got squashed. I mean, that was one of my classic videos actually.
A good game by Ivanchuk.
Amazing game, yeah. That was absolutely amazing. So this Bishop B5, yeah, is very dangerous, isn't it? So there are some very dangerous second move alternatives here. If White doesn't want to play D4,
he can play C3 here, of course. If he wishes.
C3, yes, it's transposing into some C3 Sicilian lines. Where Black's committed with D6 already.
The problem is it's not the C3 Sicilian because pawn's on D6 after Knight F6. White has a very short. So he can play Bishop E2, for example. Which
it's a little trap, yes,
yeah,
for the check.
The check.
Winning the knight, yep.
And develop slowly.
Yep.
Well, you can play Bishop D3, which is the Kopek system.
Oh yes, Danny, I beat Kopek once. That was one of my claims to fame. One of the IMs I beat Danny Kopek.
You beat Danny Kopek.
Professor of computer science at university, isn't he?
And White will play Bishop back to C2.
Yes, very nice idea though.
And prepare D4.
Very nice, sort of Roy Lopesian, isn't it? Because in Roy Lopez you're often having a bishop on C2 and playing for D4. Very, yeah, sort of Roy Lopez style. So yeah, C3 and then Bishop D3. Yeah. Also, there's a Bishop C4. White doesn't have to play C3. He can, or Bishop B5. Bishop C4.
Yeah, well, strong players have played this. It doesn't look all that hot. It looks a bit like a near beginner's move.
Yeah.
But White just tries to build up pressure in a kind of Rai Lopez style.
Because if they're not going to play D4 and you get to play Knight C6 later and this, you can just get in a tempo later with D5, can't you, sometimes, on that bishop? I think that's one of the things intuitively that I think.
Luke McShane has played this, and you play C3 and D3 and castles and rook E1 and played a bit like a Rai Lopez.
Yes, with the bishop on C4. So.
It's never really convinced me when I've seen it, but it seems to work okay.
Yes. So let's have a look now at knight c6 without d4. So after knight c6, of course, there's the Rosalimo attack, or anti-Sveshnikov. I used to hate this, and you used to torture me with it, didn't you, Paul?
I do still play this. It's a very nice nice line.
I thought you helped popularise it, unfortunately, in UK chess.
Did I? I'm not sure about that. And often white would just take the knight on c6, mangling black's pawns.
So say d6, you just take, or anything really, you just take.
Well, not anything, but certainly against several g6 I would take, yes.
And I think black's is best actually to take away from the centre, break that rule to get more control over d4 here.
And white plays slowly with d3.
Yeah, and I think there were some Chandler videos on this. White can sort of have the not commit to castling kingside, can castle maybe queenside sometimes. If you get just keep flexible for castling. Yeah.
Black will probably play e5 at some point,
yeah,
and white can maybe play f4 later.
Yes, because with that absence of the knight on c6 and less support for e5, f4's got more punch to it. I think in these lines, I've seen Adams win with a later f4. It's got more aggression to it, hasn't it, than usual?
Yes.
So okay, so knight c6 without d4, so bishop b5. Also, there's knight c3,
which will probably transpose. But here, black has an alternative with e5, clamping down on d4.
Right, but there's a bit of a hole on d5.
And white plays bishop c4 now, and again we go into a kind of Rai Lopez-y type position with slow manoeuvring.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, we need to get to the closed Sicilians. My favourite move at the moment is 2 knight c3, of course.
Right, but there's still other stuff in that line.
Yeah.
After knight 3 d6, another possibility here is the wing gambit. This is actually the best version of the wing gambit.
Best version, you think?
I don't know, but black's played, maybe it isn't, because maybe knight f6 is good here. I don't know.
Right.
So maybe it isn't good at all. But I know a delayed wing gambit is a possible idea. But the wing gambit is just generally dubious anyway.
But I think, I don't know, playing it immediately after c5, it's sort of like trying to get some ideas of the Benko gambit, isn't it? That flank pawn for accelerated.
I mean, but a3 is pretty pointless here, because black can just play b3.
b3, you think that's a good option?
Well, it is an option, and then you haven't opened up any lines. There's similar lines in the Dutch.
Right, that's not like the anti-Benko gambit, is it? Because there was queen b6 in the equivalent anti-Benko gambit with b6.
No, but the wing gambit is generally seen as being pretty dubious. Keres played it on move 2. Maybe it's better on move 2, but it's never really become very popular. And of course, there's a very famous game which we should mention. You know the famous game with the wing gambit after 2b4.
No.
Yeah, would you just go through it quickly?
Okay.
It was 2b4. It was Shirazi Peters, wasn't it? Black took, and
that rings a bell actually. Yeah, some horrible blunders.
How did it go? That's right. A3, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, a takes b5, queen e5 check.
Ouch! Slightly backfired on the diagonal. Yeah.
And white was an international master.
Oh, blimey. It'll be alright on the night. Hey, there's some popular second move alternatives we didn't actually cover. Actually, we managed to miss. Well, it's easy to miss. We covered the hyper accelerated jag, and you mentioned that the O'Kelly variation with a6. Knight f6 is the Nimzovich variation, bit of revision here. But we didn't mention queen c7. Apparently, that's the Kinteros variation. Miguel Kinteros.
It is. I'm not familiar with it, but.
White plays c3 when the queen apparently might not be that well placed.
Doesn't
on
look
c7.
too hot to me, really.
Yeah,
I don't think queen c7 is a very good move.
Yeah.
I've also seen 2 queen a5.
Oh,
just with the idea of stopping d.
It's
d4.
ridiculous, isn't it? It's quite a computer move. Queen a5. I'll be tempted for a wing gambit here because it's got bonuses, hasn't it, of the queen being attacked.
Well, yeah, but this is a pin on the a pawn, so you're not actually threatening to take on b4. I'll just get on with development.
Well, you could play bishop b2 next.
Yeah,
then you'll be threatening. And you've got pressure on the king side. But yeah, but there's also apparently don't think we know this. After c5, knight f3, f5. Have you seen this before? Apparently this is the Brussels gambit. And someone just hacked into Wiki here to add this. It's a little joke. Named after Brussels, Belgium. Really? I'm not sure. Is this a Wiki hack or is this real? Used to be thought highly dubious, but has somewhat been rehabilitated by e takes f, knight a6. Really? Known as the double Dutch. Is this made up? Is this a wind-up?
Rather you than me.
So something to try and blitz game anyway, double Dutch. Okay, so
But I have played in serious chess e4 and knight c6, knight f3, f5.
e4,
It's not Sicilian.
knight c6.
It's not Sicilian at all, so it's not really relevant to what we're
Knight
discussing.
f3.
f5.
Oh right, takes.
Yes, d5.
All right, just to undermine the centre, sort of King's Gambit-ish.
It's not very good for more than one reason.
Yeah, but it's sort of a bit like Vienna game. You try and just use that F file later. If you can get that F file later, that's interesting. So anyway, White's second move alternative. This is now my pet system, actually, to be honest. I chicken out a lot of the time of the open systems. I love playing Knight c3. I've scored at least 2 wins this season, nearly a third, with Knight c3 for that Grand Prix attack system coming up later. So if we have...
Okay, well, we'll look at the Grand Prix attack first here.
Okay.
So Knight c6 is the most normal move. And now f4. Again, bishop b5 is possible. Let's look at f4 first anyway.
Yeah.
And now g6 would be normal.
Mm.
And knight f3. Bishop g7. And now White can put the bishop on c4 or b5.
Yeah, these were both played. I think that pioneer of this used to play bishop b5 a lot, as well as bishop c4. Bishop c4 is my favourite. Just tucking the bishop. This is Andrew Martin's suggestion. Just tuck the bishop, which I saw once in the video, and it's quite dangerous. And I've scored, very good results with that in blitz. Bishop c4, but bishop b5. I don't really like giving up my light square bishop. It's more Nimzovician, isn't it? The double pawns.
I've never actually liked the idea. Black plays knight d4, then just takes the bishop. And it seems okay for White, but I don't really like that. Just personal choice.
Yeah, there was a very quick win in the Hearts League. Eddie Holland was a victim on the black side of this earlier in the season in the Hearts League.
Oh, I saw that actually. Vicious game by John Sharp.
Yes, so that's quite dangerous. But yeah, I think Hebden's played this a lot. This bishop b5. Quite a few very strong players have played
He used to. He stopped playing e4 a long time ago, but in his younger days he certainly played the Grand Prix attack.
Mm. So Wiki, is indicating about knight c3, leading to a variety of systems. So we might even have just closed Sicilian with g3, of course. Don't need to play f4. So closed Sicilian. I think Spassky used to play the closed Sicilian a lot.
Yes, Spassky played it. It became very popular in the 1970s. Spassky won quite a few games with it.
By the way, I was doing some research on Spassky just last night, and apparently he's got a 2-all record against Kasparov, one of the few world champions to have an equal score against Kasparov. Smyslov, it's a big. I think Petrosian might have beat equal to Kasparov nearly, according to ChessGames.com, on the serious games, but Spassky as well. So he was still pretty dangerous in the 80s.
Chandler's 2-0 up against Kasparov.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
When Kasparov was young and bitterly, but still.
Mm. So the closed Sicilian, Chandler was a very, very dangerous player, wasn't he? So g3, closed Sicilian.
And we can look at that a bit, can't we? Play a few moves there. G3, G6.
Yeah. I always find there's a problem here. Well, I used to find that the problem here is Black can, for me, get a comfortable game by sort of getting this set up with e6, and I find it quite a pain sometimes, because Black's got good control over the dark squares and can play f5 when White plays f4.
Yes.
And that's sort of, for me, that's sort of about equal.
I played this a lot when I was about 10 or 11, and I won a very large number of games just by pushing my pawns forward on the king side.
You were playing whites.
Yes.
Yeah.
And until the first game when somebody played f5 against me, and suddenly I was stuck.
Yeah.
But previously they'd put the knights on f6 and just play the normal dragon type play, and I just throw my kingside pawns down the board and won many games by checkmate.
Yeah, that can be great fun to play. Is this system? But Spassky has won a lot of games in this as well. Yeah, this close Sicilian. It's maybe less committal, more positional than playing F4. F4 is quite committal because theoretically, if Black gets in this and gets F5, then that's the end of White strategically, isn't it? But G3 is more solid.
I wouldn't say it's the end of White strategically. That's
well, it's a bit of a simplification, but generally, if Black can freeze the White pawns, because that pawn's often blocking in the bishop, then strategically, if Black gets control of the light squares there, so G3 is sort of a bit more fluid. I'm wondering if maybe I should play this more, this closed Sicilian. So F4 is, as we mentioned, Grand Prix attack or McDonald attack territory. It's called Wiki here. So also we've got this Morris Smith gambit, which
there's other moves there.
Yeah.
Still, Bishop B5 is also after Knight C3, Knight C6, Bishop B5 is again another way of playing it. Similar to the.
So you can play Knight F3 here to transpose into.
Yes. And there's a tricky line there, isn't there? If I can remember it, Bishop B5, Knight D4, Bishop C4. Is it? There's a line where I can't remember how it goes now, but Black can actually get into a lot of trouble, I believe. I can't remember how it goes, unfortunately. But there's a line. The queen comes to F3 and then switches to A3.
Oh,
and suddenly Black has problems on the dark squares.
Another favourite for me in Blitz chess, as well as Knight C3, has been the Morris Smith gambit. I did this technical article years ago on the Barnett site for the Morris Smith. It accelerates White's development if taken. But the big problem is Black can just avoid it with Knight F6. That's one of the big. That sort of goes. You need to know your C3 Sicilian theory.
This is C3 Sicilian now.
Yeah, transposition. But if they do accept the gambit, you can get a fun game.
But it's not highly regarded at the moment.
It's not. You wouldn't see it much at the high level.
I mean, it's dangerous, but it's not seen as being a big threat.
Yeah.
I think a 2700 would be very happy to face it.
I think Adams used it to beat British gem at British
Watson.
Yeah, and some others maybe.
I remember beating Watson with it.
Yeah.
Fairly convincingly.
Who was the Dragon specialist? Chris Ward.
Chris Ward's a Dragon specialist.
I think he might have played it against Chris Ward as well.
I don't remember.
Okay, but if we go back to also there's Knight E2, which is interesting. The Keres variation, a favourite of Paul Keres apparently. Similar ideas to the chameleon system under Knight C3. Well, I can follow up with either D4 or with maybe G3. It's just a transpositional device. There's a lot of these transpositional devices.
It may well just end up being a normal Sicilian from here.
Also, D3 seems like a passive move. Signals the King's Engine attack line though. I did lose to Swanson unfortunately in the King's Engine attack recently. I drew with him earlier in the season, but the second game he got better with me.
This is a very practical, pragmatic, flexible system because you can actually play it against the French or the Caro Khan.
You just do this. You just put the bishop here. You just play this. And then it's called Spring, isn't it? Called Spring King's Engine attack.
It's one opening that you can learn against several openings.
And Fischer used to play it. It's got the testament of Fischer behind it. He used to sort of get strong support on E5 as a basis for a kingside attack later. So that's Knight E2, the Keres system.
Recently, Gawain Jones and some of his friends have been playing a kind of version of the Grand Prix attack with D3 and putting the actual bishop on E2. So they play sort of F4 and Knight F3 and Bishop E2.
Oh, right. I thought that looks a bit funny looking, to be honest. If they did play, I mean, it looks a bit strange to me.
Not Bishop E2 here, but I mean F4 and Knight F3 and Bishop E2. And it actually leads to a kind of good version of the Dutch.
Oh right, yes, a sort of Dutch in reverse
with the white pieces.
So later you can play Queen E1, maybe C3. maybe even Dutch defence type in reverse manoeuvres like knight a3 to c2, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good version of the Dutch.
Yeah, because your queen can sometimes come out onto the attack here. So your bishop's left in the shelter, isn't it, behind the pawn chain there, rather than coming out to c4 or b5.
Thing on c4 or b5, the bishop could end up being swapped off. Here, it's going to stay on the board for later.
Yeah, that's very interesting. d3. There's also Snyder. I think I've used this with some success in Blitz. This Snyder variation, b3 here. So after the United States chess variation master Rob M. Snyder, used occasionally by Nigel Short, apparently, a favourite of Georgian GM Tamaz Galishvili. So in this, I find, if Black doesn't know their stuff, they do a move like this and they weaken themselves, and you can get ferocious, pressure, on Black. You can get all the squares and stuff. It's great fun. Anyway,
I don't think 2b3 is a move that would scare me very much.
But you can play b3 against other stuff as a sort of novelty, anyway, if you want. g3 is the Steinitz variation, immediate g3. Sometimes also played by Timonov, can transpose into close Sicilian.
Black can play an immediate d5 here, of course, which is thematic.
Yes.
And takes knight f3, bishop g4.
Yes.
Bishop g2, queen e6 check.
All right.
And king f1 is.
Yes. That's trying to exploit that weakness of the last move, not securing down d5.
Yeah.
So Black plays the immediate d5.
I think White's done quite well in that position, even though his king looks misplaced.
Yes.
Black possibly has wasted too much time.
So,
lines can be opened up.
Right, so that's forcing a particular type of position on Black if Black does.
Well, Black doesn't have to play d5, but the idea is if he doesn't, then White has a close Sicilian and he can play more flexibly. For example, the knight is on b1 rather than c3, and therefore he can possibly play c3 and d4. And Black has less control of the d4 square.
Right.
So g3 is, in fact, it's a challenge. It's saying, right, I'm going to go for an improved variation of the close Sicilian with g3. Really, you have to play d5, otherwise I'm going to get that.
Blimey. Yes, it's got more venom than you would think.
But it's not played very much, though.
Yeah, so maybe that's good for this era we're in of huge preparation. These sidelines are often quite dangerous, I think. Also, c4 immediately, but you're blocking in your bishop here, so it's not as great as the bishop b5 line.
c4 is not a very good move, actually, because Black plays knight c6.
It's sort of like English opening territory, Botvinnik system, isn't it?
And you're just giving away the d4 square a little too cheaply, I think.
Yeah. But it can be, it looks like an English Botvinnik system, because you do that in the Botvinnik system, say.
I'm not going to play e5. In this position, your bishop's blocked in and mine isn't. So I'm going to play e6 and knight e7.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's English opening territory, Botvinnik system. So c4, interesting. b4 wing gambit, which we touched on before.
It was played by Keres in his youth.
To the flanked Black c pawn, sort of like a bit like.
Doesn't White play 3d4 instead of a3 after takes?
All right, d4.
I think so.
Maybe that's where I've been going wrong with it. Not to play. According to this, it's a3. According to Wiki, a3. Oh, then dominated centre with only d4. Okay. A3 is similar to the wing gamut with the idea of keeping the threat of b4.
Oh, 2a3. Simon Williams played this in the British, I seem to remember.
Did he win with it?
I think he lost.
There's also knight a3, and our good friend that you've played recently has played this a lot in the past, Peter Lelic.
Has he?
Yeah, you had a good game with him recently. He put on YouTube. It's one of his latest.
Wasn't an especially good game.
But he's quite a good player nowadays. He's over 200 ECF.
He's slowly improving.
Yeah. But he's got a few videos about knight a3, an eccentric move recently brought into prominence by GM Vadim I can't pronounce the names. Zvagintsev in the 2005 Russian Championship Super Final. he drew twice with and beating Alexander Kalifman. He used it 3 times during the tournament, drawing twice and beating Alexander Kalifman with it.
Kalifman, yes.
Yeah, 93. So it avoids all the theory, doesn't it?
It looks vaguely playable, but I wouldn't play it.
Sometimes in the Roy Lopez or other variations, the knight can just reroute to the centre, or you don't have to see a move like C3.
A move like that is good to avoid theory.
Yeah, if you just want to be creative. Also, there's Bishop C4, which is the boulder attack, apparently.
Which is going to be very similar to what we looked at before, isn't it?
Yeah, and it sort of prompts black to try and punish like E6 and D5 in theory to attack the bishop. Oh, there's also Bishop E2, which I think you've mentioned, the slow variation.
I didn't mention that.
Oh, sorry, you mentioned it in conjunction with F4. I mean,
yeah.
But Bishop E2 in its own right is okay. Is potentially with an aggressive
Again,
idea.
I'm not really scared.
Yeah, these aren't scary. There's also, I think, Nakamura has played this in Blitz. I think Queen H5, or is it against something else? Queen H5.
They used to actually play this quite a lot.
Oh yes, mentioned by Nakamura in wikis. It's just attacking the C5 pawn.
They used to play this quite a lot in the 19th century in odds games with the F pawn. So Queen H5 was actually check.
Oh right, and then winning the C5 pawn.
So black is up a second pawn, and black generally won these games fairly quickly.
Apparently, black should use this as a gambit opportunity. If he gambits the pawn, sorry, he takes it. Not a gambit. Pardon me. He gets that centre pawn. That might be quite good for black.
I imagine black's already slightly better here.
After Queen H4. Oh, pardon me. So here, after Queen H4, apparently Nakamura, he lost quite quickly in this, after Queen H4. Because his queen's misplaced. He lost 23 moves to Andrei Volotkin in 2005. And then McDonald's criticised the opening experiments as rather foolish. But it's novel. It's novel stuff. It's exciting. He's one of the most exciting players.
He also played it on move 2 against E5 as well. I think he lost there as well.
Blimey! So we've done a sort of hitchhiker's guide to the Sicilian defence.
We've looked at the C3 Sicilian, haven't we?
Oh, the C3 Sicilian. Okay.
Rather important.
Okay, Alpin C3 Sicilian. Yes, a lot of stuff has been on Sicilian. David Howell's been playing the C3 Sicilian a lot in recent years. Chandler has written a book. Chandler popularised this, didn't he, with his book on the C3 Sicilian? There was a book by Chandler, wasn't there?
Possibly. I beat Gawain Jones with it last year in a 5-minute game.
Blimey. I drew with Gawain Jones once in a 5-minute game. Yes. He was worse. He offered to draw. But anyway, aside from that, sorry. So it's got a lot of stuff. So C3.
Well, let's look at D5 is one of the main moves. White takes. Queen takes. D4. And now the rest was knight F6 or E6 is possible.
So say knight
F3, and now bishop G4 or E6.
Yeah, bishop G4 is more adventurous, getting that bishop outside the pawn chain. So E6. Okay, let's look at E6 maybe.
And I think maybe now bishop E3 is the move, I believe, and takes.
Isolate queen's pawn situation.
Yeah, knight C6, knight C3, queen D6.
Queen D6, not D8. Is Queen D8 possible? Or is it too passive? Keep the queen useful, maybe on. Might be as useful.
Yeah, Queen D6 is generally fine, and now bishop. Where's the bishop go? D3, maybe. Bishop E7, and both sides castle, and on we go. So
we have an isolated queen's pawn situation, where sometimes I think I lost to Andrew Hom once in this. He sort of played A3, bishop back to C2, Queen D3. It's typical isolated queen pawn situations, which you're supposed to know they come across in different openings. These isolated queen pawn situations, where if black can survive to the ending, he should be better. He or she should be better. But white's got this dangerous attacking position, hasn't he?
White has chances. White has good control of the centre and can play on the queen's side.
Ems also played C3 Sicilian. I remember him hacking up people in various tournaments with a C3 Sicilian. Yeah, it's very, very popular, isn't it?
Of course, there's other moves, of course. Knight F6 is an alternative.
That's one of the main responses now, isn't it?
Yeah. And e5, knight d5, d4.
So Nimzovichin or Alekhine defence plan ideas borrowed, just hyper modern.
Yeah, and after takes, black white can play knight f3 or retake.
Now, why is that so popular? Is it because white's committed, basically, the logic of this, that white is committed to c3, so doesn't want to later waste time playing c4 here, because it's like seemingly pointless moving that pawn twice, isn't it? So I suppose that provocation of, you know, switching to Alekhine defence kind of mode is very, very popular.
Well, the pawn's already on c5.
Mm.
So this is not as good as the Nimzovich Sicilian. Well, obviously the pawn's on c5 there, but this is inferior to the Nimzovich Sicilian variation because the pawn's on c3 already.
Mm.
When white wants fast development,
Yeah.
so c4 is not a problem here.
Yeah.
But d4 and takes and you play knight f3 or take the
Yeah, because you can exploit that temporary pin.
or even take with the queen. That's also possible. And I've played that a few times.
Yeah. What happens usually here? E6?
E6, yes. Knight f3, knight c6, queen e4, and so on.
Yes.
But the main line is where white ends up recapturing on d4 with the pawn. There are lots of quite dangerous lines there as well.
So Wiki is indicating originally championed by Semyon Alipin at the end of the 19th century, revived in the late 60s by Evgeny Shvechnikov and Evgeny Vasikov. Today the strongest practitioners include GMs Tiviakov and Eduardo Rosenthalis. Rosenthalis, pardon me.
Rosenthalis plays this a lot.
So white aims to set up a classical pawn centre with d4 later. So that's like Roy Lepesian, isn't it? Roy Lepez ideas creep into Sicilian, basically, don't they, with this?
Of course, black can play 2e6.
And that can invite an advanced French defence, but not necessarily.
And after d4, d5, and we can reach an advanced French.
Or white can play ed, check it out of that.
Which could also lead to a French-style position.
Oh, yes.
Where black has a nice queen's pawn, but he's quite active if he takes with the pawn. Or he can take with the queen when we go back to the other line. Yeah,
but if you take the pawn, yeah. I think Karpov beat Judith Polgol in this line. He played this line, bishop e3. And if black, plays this, then b3 is going to be dangerous. Just, there's a dark square. I had a video, dark square strangulation of Karpov being one of the Polgars in this.
Right.
Yeah, so it can be distinctly different. Black tries to get an advanced French, but it's not necessarily going to happen with e6.
It's quite a solid way of playing 2e6.
Mm. Yeah, so I think most popular is knight f6 at the moment, isn't it?
I don't know if knight f6. I would guess d5 is more popular, actually, but it's close.
D5 is the most popular, just immediate d5.
I face d5 more often, I think.
So, okay, yeah. So the Sicilian is an immensely rich opening system. Lots of transpositional devices. Lots of alternatives with the same idea or trying to accelerate the same idea. Particularly the dragon formation can be accelerated or hyper accelerated. The Najdorf remains the most popular, doesn't it? If we go back to the Najdorf.
Yes.
And that's probably because of the influence of Fischer and Kasparov, really, the two main practitioners. Isn't it a coincidence that two of the most dangerous, aggressive, dynamic players in history, they favoured the Najdorf?
Well, Fischer and Kasparov are players who want to win with black pieces. They don't want to play the Petrov and agree to draw move 15. They want to win, so they play the most dynamic system, which is also sound and leads to a double-edged counter-attacking game.
Yeah. So
and many have followed suit.
But Fischer, unfortunately, he lost in the 1972 match of it. But the one of the games was this mysterious bishop trap blunder where he got his bishop. He must have miscalculated or something. I don't know.
Wasn't that?
Oh, was that Najdorf or was that some of that?
I think that wasn't that Queen's Gambit or something.
Oh, pardon me. Sorry. Yeah.
I can't remember. I don't think it was.
Sorry. No. Sorry. No.
I can't remember what I think.
But he did lose in the poison pawn anyway with knight b3 in one game. But yeah. So thanks, Paul. I don't know. that's a good overview and summary. Maybe we should do detailed videos on specific variations. So if you guys on YouTube want us to go into a detailed video next time, me and Paul meet up, just tell us your favourite variation and we'll try and cover that in more detail. I assume it's going to be the Najdorf, but please leave your comments in the video for what variation of Sicilian you want us to focus in on next time. So I hope you've enjoyed this roller coaster ride, this overview. It's been fun from my point of view, and I hope you've enjoyed listening.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Triff. Very interesting.
Okay.
I hope you've learnt something about Sicilian.
Yes. Okay. Thanks very much. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.